Hi, Lorraine Rogers back again with lesson 5 of the A to Z of watercolour painting. Now last lesson we did this little landscape, and no doubt some of you will have encountered some problems already with streaking and what have you. Just remember, if you were learning to play golf or learning a musical instrument, you'd be prepared to practice, and the only way you can achieve success in watercolour is to do the practice. It's not difficult. Some people say it's difficult, but it's not difficult. It just requires a bit of practice, i.e. nobody can learn out of a book how much water, how much pigment, how wet to put things on, because if it's too wet all the water will pool, if it's too dry you'll get the streakiness. So just continue practicing, and the best suggestion I have is have a little swear jar behind you, and every time you feel like swearing, put some money in that and that'll buy you more watercolour paper. So here we go. We did this last week, or last lesson, the simple little landscape, mauve hills pushing the background back, cooling the background. So today I'm going to warm the foreground by putting on a wash of burnt sienna. The burnt sienna I use is this Daler-Rowney. You'll find in some brands it's quite a dull colour, but the Daler-Rowney is just brilliant and really sings on the paper when you put it on as a wash, and it mixes my lovely greens. So I've tried a lot of different brands, but I find this one the best. So I'm just going to do a watery wash of burnt sienna in this foreground. So to do that I'm going to turn my paper upside down, still sloped, and mix a watery wash. So you'll see what I mean by this beautiful rich colour with the Daler-Rowney burnt sienna, and you'll find all burnt siennas aren't the same, but that's a little bit still too thick. A little bit more water, and I suggest you put it to the paper first, and if you find it's opaque, obviously you haven't got enough water, and if it's really watery, you'll find when it dries you'll hardly notice that you've done it. Remember, watercolour dries a bit paler than oils and acrylics. So I'll do my first wash straight across. Make sure you've got all the grains of paint out of your wash. It is fairly strong, so I'll just add a little bit of water for the next row. Remember, I'm aiming to keep that bead of water along the bottom. Still strong, so add a little bit more water. And again. And for up here, I don't want it warm in that background area, so I'm just going to use basically clear water there. Now that's a little bit streakier than I would have liked it. So I did show you a couple of weeks ago, a couple of lessons ago, this really soft tack-long brush, and I can just use that very gently to get rid of any streakiness, like so. Now you don't want to scrub this on the paper or anything, just very gently, herringbone fashion, waft the brush across the paper. Now that's serving two purposes: to even out the wash, and also, as you can see, I've lifted off a little bit of paint, so where it was a little bit strong, it's lifted off paint. So now we've warmed the foreground, brings it forward, cooled the background, and there's lots of places you can take the painting from here. We can, when that's dry, build it up with some trees in the foreground. So now I'm going to mix up my greens again. Showed you those in previous lessons, but that takes a bit of practice as well. I think mixing greens is one of the most difficult things you can do. Sounds easy, but when you put it into practice it's not as easy as it sounds. And these are all the problems that I've encountered as a beginner painter, and even to this day I still encounter problems. So this is phthalo blue and burnt sienna together. Now obviously if you put too much burnt sienna in, it's going to go too brown, too much phthalo and it's going to go too blue. So just keep on persevering until you get a green that you're happy with, a sort of very dark gum tree green. Then with what's left in your bristles of your brush, go into a different area of your palette, add a little bit of Indian yellow. So you've got your dark and your mid green, Then another mixing area. That's why these palettes come in so handy, and a bit of raw sienna. And that gives you your dark, your mid and your light green. So with watercolour you always start with your lightest value first. And I'm going to change this completely now by putting on some trees in the foreground. There's all manner of things you can do to completely change the painting. So I'm mixing up my lights, darks and mid greens. And as you can see, I use my brush in a kind of sideways manner. And I'm actually moving from my shoulder. I'm not moving just from my wrist. And as the paint comes off the end of the brush, you get these little marks on the paper that look a bit like leaves. So just continuing to build that up. And this is something I started doing many years ago. Sold lots of little paintings like this. A lot of them were out of my imagination or motivated by scenery that I see all the time when I'm driving around with my husband, enjoying the landscape and the local scenery. It's lovely to just get outdoors at the weekend, take a thermos and a sandwich and just go for a drive, discover places you haven't been before. Now the main thing with this, got my foliage on. You want a variation of lights and darks, and you don't want a hard bottom on the trees here. So I've just got water on my brush now, and I'm just kind of making marks underneath to soften that bottom edge, like so. And I can even bring that down with a little bit of a pale green wash, leaving a lot of the underneath wash to shine through. So you've got a variation of colours there, and we'll do something on the other side as well to balance that. So maybe over here, some trees. The more you explore the countryside around you, the more motivated you'll get about painting. A lot of people say to me, oh, I don't know what to paint. But you'll find the more you paint, the more you know what you want to paint next time. So whether I'm working or playing, I like to paint. So I'm just going to soften that bottom again, so I haven't got a hard bottom. Maybe we'll put a tree out here as well, like so. And the finishing touch to this little landscape is just putting the tree trunks through the trees. I always put my foliage on first and thread the tree trunks and branches through the foliage. With watercolour you can't put the branches on first and then try and get the paint of the foliage for the foliage over the top of that. So put your foliage on first. It requires some practice with this rigger brush too, just using the very tip to get the finest lines. Anyway, there you go. Completely changed the landscape. So have fun with that. Many hours can be passed doing things like this. Bye. Remember, come and see me on www.sidewalk-gallery.com.au. Bye for now.